True strength never needs to announce itself. An old man stands at the center of a centuries-old dojo. His wooden sword is raised, pointed at the chest of a guest who was never supposed to be here. 20 masters watch in silence. The old man has not been defeated in 41 years. He does not bow. Instead, he speaks words the translator can barely bring himself to repeat. I do not lower my sword to entertainers. Show me you deserve the honor, or leave this place. The guest rises slowly, walks past every weapon on the rack, picks up nothing, steps onto the mat empty-handed. He stands 3 feet from the blade. The guest's name is Bruce Lee. The old man is a grandmaster who has not bowed to another fighter since 1931. But what happens in the next 12 seconds? If you're new here, subscribe and follow for more. Now, to understand what happened inside that dojo, you need to understand the week before it. Not Bruce Lee's whole life, not his childhood, just the 7 days that put him on that mat, standing in front of a sword with nothing in his hands. It was October of 1972. Bruce had just finished principal photography on Enter the Dragon in Hong Kong. He was exhausted. His body was running on 4 hours of sleep a night and meals he barely touched. But he had a stop to make before returning home. Private trip to Kyoto, Japan. No cameras, no film crew, no entourage. Just Bruce and a man named Taiki Kimura, his most trusted student and one of his oldest friends. Now here's the thing. Bruce didn't go to Kyoto for tourism. He went because of a letter. A sealed scroll, actually. Hand-brushed Japanese calligraphy on rice paper. Delivered to his hotel in Hong Kong by a man who bowed, handed it over, and left without a single word. Taiki translated it that night. The letter was an invitation. A private Kendo exhibition at the Yamamoto Dojo, one of the oldest training halls in Japan. 300 years of unbroken tradition inside those walls. And in all that time, not once had a non-Japanese person been allowed to step through the front gate. Not once. The invitation came from a man named Hiroshi Sato. He was one of the younger masters at the dojo, 44 years old. Progressive thinker. He believed the martial arts world was too closed, too territorial. He had seen Bruce's films. More importantly, he had studied Bruce's public demonstrations. The speed, the precision, the philosophy behind Jeet Kune Do. Sato believed Bruce Lee was not just a movie star. He believed Bruce was a legitimate martial artist who deserved to witness their art up close. But Sato did not have the authority to invite Bruce alone. The decision had to go through the senior council. 12 masters voted. The result was 7 in favor, 5 against. A narrow victory, and the 5 who voted against it made their feelings very clear. The loudest voice among them belonged to Grandmaster Takashi Yamamoto. Yamamoto was not just any master. He was the soul of that dojo, 67 years old. He had begun his kendo training at the age of 5 under his father, who trained under his father before him. The lineage went back to the samurai clans of feudal Japan. His record in competitive kendo was perfect. 41 years without a single defeat. His bakken moved so fast during demonstrations that it hummed in the air. People said it sounded like a wasp. He had been declared a living national treasure by the Japanese government. And he wanted nothing to do with Bruce Lee. To Yamamoto, Bruce was a performer. A man who fought on camera for money. A man who mixed styles like ingredients in a soup, with no respect for tradition, no respect for lineage. He called Bruce an entertainer. And in the world of classical Japanese martial arts, believe me, there is no sharper insult. So when Bruce arrived at the dojo that morning, he already knew. Taiki had warned him. Not everyone wants you here, he said. Bruce nodded. I know. That's why I have to go. The dojo sat at the end of a narrow stone path, surrounded by maple trees. Bruce removed his shoes at the entrance. He wore simple black clothing. No logos, no flash. He carried nothing. Taiki stayed 3 steps behind him. Inside, 20 Kendo masters sat in 2 rows along the edges of the polished wooden floor. The air was still. Nobody spoke. Bruce was led to a cushion in the far corner, the position of an observer. He sat down, crossed his legs, placed his hands on his knees, and did not move. For the next 90 minutes he watched. One by one, the masters demonstrated their art. Strikes, blocks, footwork patterns perfected over decades. Each demonstration ended the same way. The master would turn to Bruce, lower his sword, and offer a respectful bow. Bruce returned each bow with equal depth and stillness. Then came the final demonstration, the one everyone had been waiting for. Grandmaster Yamamoto rose from his seat. He walked to the center of the mat carrying a bakken that had been in his family for over 100 years. The wood was dark, smooth, heavy with history. He performed his demonstration in absolute silence. Every strike was precise, every movement deliberate. When he finished, he stood at the center of the mat, breathing steadily, and turned toward the guest of honor. This was the moment. Tradition required the bow, the acknowledgement, the lowering of the sword. Yamamoto raised his bakken instead, pointed it directly at Bruce's chest, and spoke. The room changed in that instant. What had been a controlled, respectful evening became something else entirely. Something dangerous. Because Yamamoto was not performing anymore. He was challenging. And in that dojo, a challenge from the Grandmaster was not symbolic. It was real. The translator's voice cracked as he delivered the words. I do not lower my sword to entertainers. A sword bows only to a sword. Show me you deserve the honor, or leave this place. 20 masters sat frozen. Not one of them moved. Not one of them breathed loud enough to hear, because what Yamamoto had just done was not simply rude. It was a formal rejection, a declaration in front of every senior practitioner in the school that Bruce Lee was unworthy of respect. In that room, under those rules, there were only 2 responses. Accept the humiliation and walk out, or answer the challenge. Now get this. Taiki Kimura, sitting behind Bruce, felt his stomach drop. He told this part of the story years later and said he nearly stood up to intervene, to apologize, to get Bruce out of there before something irreversible happened. But before he could move, Bruce placed one hand flat on the mat. A signal. Stay. Bruce stood slowly. There was no anger on his face. No tension in his jaw. He looked calm. The kind of calm that makes people nervous. He stepped off the cushion and walked toward the center of the mat. Not fast. Not slow. Just steady. He passed the weapons rack. Now here's the thing. The rack held 6 bakken and 4 shurnai. Wooden swords and bamboo swords. Every person in that room expected Bruce to pick one up. That was how you answered a kendo challenge. Sword to sword. That was the language they understood. Bruce didn't touch a single one. He walked past the rack like it wasn't there, stepped onto the mat empty-handed, and stopped 3 feet from the tip of Yamamoto's bakken. The Grandmaster's eyes narrowed. His grip tightened on the handle, because this was something he had never encountered. In 41 years of competition, every opponent he had ever faced held a weapon. Every single one. The idea of standing before a raised sword with nothing in your hands was not bravery in Kendo. It was insanity. Bruce spoke through the translator. His voice was level, almost quiet. You won't need to lower your sword. In 12 seconds, you won't be holding it. Believe me, the silence that followed that sentence could have cracked stone. Yamamoto attacked. He launched a downward diagonal strike. The Kesagiri. It was his signature technique. Perfected over 4 decades of daily practice, delivered thousands of times in competition, never once countered by any living practitioner. The bakken came down in a blur aimed directly at Bruce's skull. Fast, brutal, final. Bruce did not step backward. He stepped diagonally forward, into the strike, into the blind spot. There is a gap in every downward sword strike. It exists between full extension and the beginning of recovery. A fraction of a second. a space no wider than an inch. Most fighters cannot see it. Bruce lived in it. He caught the Bakken mid-swing with one hand. Not by fighting against it, by moving with it. He redirected the momentum in a circular motion. Yamamoto's wrists followed the curve before his brain understood what was happening. The physics were simple, but the execution was inhuman. The Bakken rotated in Yamamoto's grip, and before the old man could adjust, the sword slipped free from his fingers. Bruce held it. One hand, Yamamoto's own Bakken, the weapon that had been in his family for 100 years. 12 seconds. Not 13. Not 11. 12. Grandmaster Takashi Yamamoto stood empty-handed on his own mat, in his own dojo, in front of his own students and peers, disarmed by a man who carried no weapon. His face showed nothing at first, then confusion, then something worse, recognition. He understood what had just happened, and he understood that every person in the room had seen it. Nobody made a sound. The moment hung in the air like smoke. Then Bruce did the thing that no one expected, the thing that turned a defeat into something else entirely. He reversed the Bakken in his hand so the handle faced Yamamoto. He extended it with both hands, and he bowed. Not a shallow nod, not a quick gesture, a full, proper Japanese bow. Deep. His forehead came within inches of the sword. It was the bow of a student to a master, the bow of a man showing respect to someone who had shown him none. Yamamoto stared at his own weapon being offered back with more care than he had used when he pointed it at Bruce's chest. His lip trembled. Just once. He reached out and took the Bakken. Then Grandmaster Takashi Yamamoto, a man who had not bowed to another fighter since 1931, lowered his sword, and bowed to Bruce Lee so deeply that his white hair touched the mat. He said one sentence. The translator delivered it barely above a whisper. "Forgive me. I mistook the ocean for a puddle." The room exhaled, and then something unexpected happened. Yamamoto straightened. He looked at Bruce for a long moment. Then he turned to one of the younger students kneeling at the edge of the mat and spoke a single word. The student rose quickly and disappeared through a side door. He returned carrying a black lacquered tea set on a wooden tray. Yamamoto gestured for Bruce to sit, not on the observer's cushion in the corner, at the center of the mat. Beside him, he poured the tea himself. His hands were steady now. Whatever storm had passed through him had settled. The 20 masters watched in complete stillness as their grandmaster served tea to Bruce Lee with his own hands, an honor he had extended to only 4 people in his entire life. They sat together. The dojo was quiet. The confrontation was over, and for a brief, still moment, it felt like the hardest part was behind them. 2 men from different worlds sharing tea on a polished wooden floor. It looked like peace, felt like resolution, but it wasn't, not even close. The tea was still warm in the cups when the first crack appeared. Master Endo Katsuro stood. He was the second most senior practitioner in the dojo, 59 years old, built like a closed fist. He had been one of the 5 who voted against Bruce's invitation, and he had sat through the entire exhibition without moving, without clapping, without once changing his expression. Now he rose to his feet with the kind of deliberate slowness that tells you a man has been holding something back for a very long time. He did not address Bruce. He addressed Yamamoto. His words came fast and sharp. The translator hesitated, unsure whether to relay them. Takei, sitting behind Bruce, understood enough Japanese to catch the meaning before the translation came. He leaned forward and whispered to Bruce, "This is bad." Endo was not angry about the disarming. He was angry about the bow. In his eyes, what Yamamoto had done on that mat was not a gesture of respect. It was a betrayal. The grandmaster of the Yamamoto school, a lineage older than most nations, had bowed to a foreign entertainer in front of every senior master. And in Endo's world, that was not something you could take back. A bow from a grandmaster was a formal acknowledgement. It carried legal and traditional weight within the Kendo community. It meant something in writing, in record, in history. Now here's where the conflict changed completely. This was no longer about Bruce Lee versus Takashi Yamamoto. That fight was over in 12 seconds. This was about what that fight had broken open. A fracture inside the dojo that had been building for years. Tradition versus evolution. Isolation versus openness. And Bruce was standing right in the middle of it without even realizing it. Endo made his position clear. He said that if Yamamoto's bow stood, if no formal retraction was made, then he and the 4 other dissenting masters would leave the school permanently. They would take their students. They would establish a separate lineage. 300 years of unity would be finished. Not because of a fight, because of a bow. Believe me, the weight of that threat was enormous. In Japanese martial arts, a school splitting is not like a business disagreement. It is a death. The original lineage is weakened. The reputation is damaged. Students must choose sides. Families are divided. Friendships end. It is the one thing every grandmaster in history has tried to prevent above all else. Yamamoto sat perfectly still while Endo spoke. His face revealed nothing, but his right hand, resting on his knee, pressed down hard enough that his knuckles turned white. He was hearing a man he had trained beside for 30 years threaten to destroy everything they had built together. And the reason was Bruce Lee. Bruce understood. Even without the full translation, he understood. He could read the room, the body language, the tension between the 2 men. He turned to Taiki and asked quietly what was happening. Taiki told him, all of it. And this is where Bruce made the choice that changed everything. The choice that, depending on who tells this story, was either the bravest thing he ever did or the most reckless. He stood up. He asked the translator to relay his words carefully. Then he spoke directly to Endo. He said he had not come to the dojo to cause division. He said he had not come to prove anything. He had come to learn, to watch, to honor their art by being present. He said the Grandmaster's bow was a gift he did not ask for and did not expect. And if that gift was causing harm to the school, then he would do the only thing that made sense. He would give it back. He told Endo and the room that he was willing to make a public statement. A written acknowledgement that the bow was a gesture of hospitality, not a formal recognition. Something that would allow Yamamoto to save face without retracting what he felt. A middle path. A way to keep the school whole. The room went quiet again. But this was a different kind of quiet. Because what Bruce had just offered was, in the language of that tradition, an extraordinary act. He was voluntarily reducing the significance of the greatest honor he had ever received to protect a man who had insulted him an hour earlier. Endo looked at Bruce for the first time. Really looked at him. Then he looked at Yamamoto. Yamamoto's jaw tightened. He said one word. The translator paused, then delivered it. No. Yamamoto refused the compromise. He refused to let Bruce diminish what had happened. He said his bow was real. It was earned. And he would not allow anyone, not Endo, not Bruce, not 300 years of tradition, to tell him it was anything less. Endo's face hardened. He turned and walked toward the door. For Master stood and followed him. Halfway across the floor, Endo stopped. He looked back at Yamamoto and said his final words of the evening. The translator delivered them slowly. You have chosen a stranger over your brothers. When this dojo falls, remember who held the door open. 5 men walked out. The door slid shut behind them. Yamamoto did not watch them leave. He sat on the mat, hands on his knees, staring straight ahead. The tea was cold now. The cup sat untouched. Bruce stood beside him, and for the first time that night, he had no idea what to do. The confrontation on the mat had lasted 12 seconds. This one had no timer, and the damage was already done. The remaining 15 masters did not leave. But they did not speak either. They sat in their rows like statues, eyes forward, processing what they had just witnessed. Their grandmaster had been challenged, disarmed, had bowed to a foreigner, and now 5 of their senior brothers had walked out the door. All in one evening. The structure they had trusted their entire lives had cracked down the middle. And nobody knew what to say. Bruce did. He knelt beside Yamamoto, not across from him, beside him, the way you sit next to someone who is hurting. And he waited. He did not ask questions. He did not offer comfort. He did not try to fix anything. He just knelt there, hands on his knees, matching Yamamoto's posture exactly. Two men sitting the same way on the same mat in the same silence. It was Takei who told this part later. He said Bruce stayed in that position for nearly 10 minutes without moving. The remaining masters began to leave, one by one, bowing quietly at the door. Eventually only Bruce, Takei, Yamamoto, and the translator remained. Then Yamamoto spoke, quietly, not to Bruce, not to anyone in particular. He spoke the way a man speaks when he is thinking out loud, and the translator relayed it in fragments. He said he had trained with a sword since he was 5 years old. He said his father placed a bakken in his hands before he could write his own name. He said every morning of his life for 62 years began the same way. Wake, dress, train. He said the sword was not a weapon to him. It was a language, the only language he had ever fully understood. And then he said the thing that broke the evening wide open. He said that when Bruce caught his bakken mid-strike in that fraction of a second, he felt something he had never felt before. Not defeat, not shame. He felt relief, because for 41 years, no one had been able to stop him. And that meant for 41 years, he had never been sure if his skill was real or if his opponents were simply not good enough. Bruce had given him the answer, and the answer was both. His skill was extraordinary, but it was not untouchable. And knowing that, finally, after 4 decades, was a gift. Now get this. Yamamoto turned to Bruce and asked a question that the translator delivered with visible surprise. What do you see when a sword comes at your face? Bruce thought for a moment. Then he answered, I don't see a sword. I see intention. The sword is just the last thing that moves. Before the sword, there is the shoulder. Before the shoulder, there is the breath. Before the breath, there is the decision. I move when the decision happens. The sword hasn't started yet. Yamamoto closed his eyes. He stayed like that for a long time. Then he opened them and said, That is what my teacher told me when I was 6. I have spent 61 years trying to understand it. You just said it like it was obvious. Bruce shook his head. It took me my whole life too. I just don't have as many years as you, so it sounds shorter. Yamamoto laughed. Believe me when I tell you that the translator nearly fell over. Because according to Takei, no one in that room, no one in that entire school had ever heard Grandmaster Yamamoto laugh. Not once. Not in decades. The sound was rough and unused, like a door opening for the first time in years. But it was real. They talked for 3 hours. Yamamoto served more tea. He asked about Jeet Kune Do, about Wing Chun, about the philosophy of intercepting. Bruce asked about the history of the Yamamoto lineage, about the connection between Kendo and Zen, about what it felt like to carry a tradition that old on your shoulders every single day. The translator worked without pause, his voice growing hoarse by the second hour. What they discussed in full was never recorded. Neither man wrote it down. Takei sat in the corner and said he could follow some of it, but much of it went beyond language. It was 2 men who had spent their lives mastering different paths, realizing they had been walking toward the same point from opposite directions. When Bruce finally stood to leave, Yamamoto walked him to the door. Not the side door, the main entrance, the one that opened onto the stone path. He stood at the threshold and watched Bruce put his shoes on. Then he said one final thing. The translator hesitated before delivering it. Yamamoto repeated himself, firmly. The translator spoke. Come back. This door is open to you now. It will not close again. Bruce bowed. Yamamoto bowed. Takei bowed. And then Bruce Lee walked down the stone path, past the maple trees, and into the Kyoto night. If this story is speaking to you, take a moment and subscribe. It means more than you know. But the story did not end that night. What Yamamoto did in the following week is what turned 12 seconds in a dojo into something that echoed across 300 years of history. 3 days after the exhibition, Yamamoto summoned his remaining 15 masters to the dojo. He sat at the center of the mat in the same position where Bruce had disarmed him. In front of him was a low wooden table. On the table sat a single sheet of rice paper, a brush, and a stone inkwell. He told them what he was going to do. He was going to write a formal decree. a document carrying his name, his seal, and the full authority of the Yamamoto lineage. He was going to send it to every Kendo school in Japan. Every single one. And the decree would say something that no Kendo grandmaster had said in 300 years. Some of the masters nodded. Others looked at the floor. One asked quietly if Yamamoto had considered the consequences. The old man said he had thought of nothing else for 3 days and 3 nights. Then he picked up the brush. He wrote slowly, each character placed with the same precision he brought to his sword work. When he finished, he set the brush down, pressed his personal seal into red ink, and stamped the bottom of the page. He read it aloud once. Then he rolled the paper and handed it to Hiroshi Sato, the man who had started all of this with a single invitation. The decree read, "The way of the sword is not the way of the sword alone. I have seen the truth of this with my own eyes. His name is Bruce Lee. Open your doors." Now here's the thing. In the world of Japanese Kendo, a formal decree from a grandmaster of Yamamoto standing was not a suggestion. It was not a recommendation. Carried weight. It was studied. It was debated. It was copied and distributed. And this particular decree did something that had never been done before. It formally acknowledged a non-Japanese, non-Kendo practitioner as an equal. Not as a curiosity. Not as a guest. As an equal. Sato personally carried copies of the decree to dojos across Japan over the following months. 17 schools accepted it and displayed it on their walls. Some framed it. Others hung it on simple hooks near the entrance where every student would see it when they arrived for training. A few schools rejected it outright, but 17 said yes. 17 doors opened, and then the students added something of their own. Beneath each copy of the decree, in each of the 17 dojos, someone handwrote an addition on a separate piece of paper. Nobody knows who started it. Nobody knows which dojo did it first. But the same words appeared in all 17 locations, written by students, not by masters. It read, "The man who disarmed the master without a weapon." As for Endo and the 5 masters who walked out, the split did happen. But it did not destroy the Yamamoto school the way Endo had promised. The school continued. It adapted. The 15 remaining masters trained harder. New students arrived. Some of them came specifically because they had heard about the decree. They came because they wanted to train in a place that had the courage to open its doors when every tradition told it to stay closed. Endo's breakaway school lasted 11 years before it quietly dissolved. Its students drifted back to other dojos. Some returned to the Yamamoto school. Endo himself never spoke publicly about that night again. He passed away in 1986. No formal decree was ever issued in his name. And Bruce went home to Hong Kong. He finished post-production on Enter the Dragon. He trained. He wrote. He lived his life at the speed that only Bruce Lee could sustain. He never spoke publicly about what happened in Kyoto. Not in interviews. Not in his writings. Taiki Kimura was the only person who shared the details, and even then only in fragments, only to close students, only late at night when the training was done and the room was quiet. Less than a year later, on July 20th, 1973, Bruce Lee died. He was 32 years old. The world lost a man who had changed martial arts forever. The news reached Kyoto the following morning. A student brought a newspaper to the dojo and placed it on the mat without a word. Yamamoto read the headline. He set the paper down. Then he knelt on the wooden mat, took the bakken from the wall, laid it across his knees, and did not move for a very long time. When he finally stood, he walked to the entrance of the dojo and hung a white cloth across the doorway. In Japanese tradition, this was a sign of mourning. He left it there for 7 days. Yamamoto lived until 1989. He continued to teach until the last year of his life. He never retracted the decree. He never apologized for it. And he never again refused to bow to a visiting martial artist, regardless of their style, regardless of their country. Every guest who entered the Yamamoto dojo from that night forward was met with the same words from the Grandmaster. You are welcome here. A sword bows to a sword, but it also bows to the truth. The bakken that Bruce caught that night is still in the dojo. It sits in a glass case near the main entrance. The wood is dark with age. smooth from generations of hands. There is a small mark on the handle where Bruce's fingers gripped it during those 12 seconds. The students do not touch it. But every new student who joins the school is brought to the case on their first day and told the story. The full story. Not the version with the dramatic disarming and nothing else. The version with the tea, the conversation, the laughter, the decree. The 5 men who walked out and the 15 who stayed. The door that opened and never closed again. Because this is what that night was really about. Not 12 seconds. Not a sword. Not even Bruce Lee. It was about what happens when a man who has spent his entire life being certain is suddenly shown that certainty is not the same thing as understanding. And instead of turning away from that, he turns toward it. He writes it down. He stamps it with his name. And he says to every person who will listen, I was wrong. And being wrong was the best thing that ever happened to me. True strength never needs to announce itself. Yamamoto learned that. Bruce already knew it. And somewhere in Kyoto, on a polished wooden floor, a bakken still rests in its case, waiting to remind anyone who looks at it that the strongest thing a man can do is open his hand.